So let's begin with prayer. Let's pray. Loving God, remind us of your presence as we gather together and lead us by your Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, what I thought that we would do something like this, a bit of a roadmap for this morning. Assumptions we used to make about pastoral care, assumptions we still make about pastoral care, ingredients for a healthy pastoral care program, and reflecting what our specific needs are in normal time and reflecting on what we need right now. So let's begin. And you can make comments or specifically add questions on chat. That's what I'd like to happen. Okay, so the old myths about pastoral care, most of us have given these up, haven't we? Firstly, that the minister does it, and I deliberately chose an old picture. You wouldn't have that happening so much anymore, would you? And of course, given the changes in ministry practice, it's impossible for the minister to do pastoral care or to be the total and only pastoral carer. I remember as a child having ministers come to see us and sitting at the kitchen table with their cup of tea, and nobody else came near us ever as a family. Even in times of dire suffering, it was only ever the minister who came. A second old myth is home visits are the best form of pastoral care. In fact, in our times, home visits are a dangerous way for most situations, especially for families or with gender issues around visiting. Having said that, there are some people in our congregations for whom home visits are the very best form of pastoral care. So we need to think about it. We need not to work from our assumptions. The other assumption is that pastoral care happens naturally in a good congregation. It doesn't need to be planned. There's no need for accountability. It's a systems thing. In other words, there has been an idea that if we're a good congregation, we will look after each other, and that's all that we need to think about. Clearly not so. Assumptions we still make. First thing is that I think that sometimes we talk about pastoral care as something we do, like it's a task, and it's from one person to another. And in a lot of very traditional congregations, there's this sense that those who offer pastoral care are the together people, and that you have to be together in order to offer pastoral care. Thirdly, there's an assumption that pastoral care is a simple ministry. In other words, it's just being kind to people. There's not a lot of strategy in it, and it's just simple people offering simple ministry. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The fourth thing is an assumption out there, I think, that pastoral care is optional for ministry agents. I have a lot of colleagues who've said to me, I don't do pastoral care. I'm a leader. I'm not a pastoral carer. Eek. And I think that that's very detrimental to community life, especially as we're a more and more marginal community. That leadership entails being aware of the people whom we lead. It doesn't matter whether you're in the church or anywhere else. If you're a leader, you need to be in touch with those whom you lead. I used to say a long time ago now that our leaders are so far in front they haven't noticed there's no one following. And I think that that's the danger for us when we get into, well, that pastoral care is not my gig, so I'll leave it to somebody else. Another assumption that we still make is that pastoral care is not strategic. So it's not worthy of the attention of those with strategic minds, because it doesn't change much. Well, I would say that pastoral care changes everything in terms of the life of a congregation. You can see I'm pretty gung-ho about pastoral care, good pastoral care. So is it a simple ministry? Here's a diagram to explain or represent the complexity of pastoral care. The smallest circle represents all those conversations that we have about those deep conversations that, if we're fortunate enough, we have with people about who they are, what their struggles are, what is their spiritual journey, who are they, how is it with their soul, what are the foundational values of someone's life. Now, those conversations are not everyday conversations, but they make a huge difference both to everyone who engages in those conversations, and they're part of good pastoral care, the opportunity to have those. The next circle is the messy middle every day of life. And so much of our pastoral work is about sharing the messiness of life together. It's the opportunity to vent about COVID. It's the opportunity to share about our concerns about loved ones. So there's a whole heap of what happens in pastoral conversations that belongs there. And in fact, it's a pretty big part of most pastoral conversations, I'd have to say. The next, the little circle on the side is our pastoral responsibility in referring people on for expert care under particular circumstances. The light green circle is about building resilience in a healthy community. So what we do when we're offering really good pastoral care is that we're building resilience into the total as well as into the lives of individuals. So it's about how we are as a community, how we together deal with hardship and suffering, and how that suffering is shared together. So when we have a really good pastoral program and really have an ethos of pastoral care in our congregation, those we become more resilient. We're more experienced. We have shared suffering together. And then the final, and not necessarily the most important, but it grows out of all the others, is our other ministries of social justice and advocacy, and our compassion ministries as congregations, as a denomination, as a presbytery, whatever. So if you want it to be complex, there it is. Pastoral care can be quite complex. However, if you want it to be simple, here's Davis McCackey's definition: to know them and to love them. And both parts of that are important. Knowing each other and loving each other. So loving people in the abstract is not as effective as loving people and knowing them together. So I want to stop for a moment and focus on the building healthy community aspect of good pastoral care, where we're building resilience and working on prevention of particular mental health, spiritual and emotional issues. So for me, a good pastoral care program changes the ethos of a congregation. That's what we're about. And in the Pastoral Partner program, what we tried to do is make the pastoral care function simple and straightforward, and for many people of a congregation to be engaged in it, so that over time, nearly everybody in the congregation has been a pastoral partner. So our task is building a healing community, not just a comfortable community, not just a happy community, but actually a community that provides opportunities for healing. By creating home as a reflection of, here's the big words, of the eschatological community, the now and not yet, an embodiment of promise. So that is who we hope to become, who we hope to be. And we hope to experience mutuality, companionship, and presence. It's a high ideal. But a lot of the things that we do in the way that we set up pastoral care actually works against those goals. So that's why we might focus on those. So when I teach about pastoral care, and as you'll see in the teaching resources, I use these sorts of images for pastoral care. Where's my horse? Is it coming? Okay. Now, these are very, I'm not going to spend much time on them, so you might have questions later about what on earth I'm talking about. But the image of pastoral care as the shepherd has a mutuality about it. The sheep and the shepherd belong together. The wounded healer, the beautiful story from the Talmud talked about by Henry Nouwen, is where the Messiah is amongst those at the city gates, binding and unbinding his bandages. So he's amongst those who are suffering, and he is one of them. Host and guest is another Henry Nouwen insight into pastoral care, and once again it talks about mutuality, when we are both host and guest, when Jesus is both host and guest. The horse tram, this is an Adelaide phenomenon from the turn of the last century, where outside the Women's and Children's Hospital there was a horse tram stop, and because of the hill that leads up to North Adelaide, they needed to hitch on an extra horse to get the tram laden with passengers up the hill. And so that hitch on another horse, the horse would pull the tram up the hill and get unhitched at the top of the hill, and would wander back down to the bus stop for the next load to take up. And so there's an element of teamwork and pulling together in that image. The bridge builder, clearly, I'm not going to go through all of these, of course, and the companion on the way, they're familiar pastoral care images. What I'm trying to say, though, is that all of them have an element of mutuality about them. It's not a transaction. These images highlight that we work together in pastoral care. The other thing, one of those problems that we have is sometimes people say that pastoral care doesn't change anything. It doesn't actually change the world. And this is a Canadian, Ronald LeBonte, from quite a long time ago, actually. But I like what he had to say, where he said that when we work with personal empowerment, there is the possibility that will consolidate into small group activity, small group support, bereavement groups, years and years of it, where individual one-to-one support for someone can lead to a really effective small group. And then our bereavement group got too big and it became a community organisation on its own, and then it had things to say into government. So personal empowerment is no small matter. I've been helping a couple of women with mental health issues. This is one of the things that happens when you retire. I've been helping a couple of women who are hoarders and have difficulty cleaning their homes and managing their belongings. And it's been fascinating to be engaged in something that takes a lot of time, but how important, how life-changing it has been for those women to feel in control of their home, let alone of their lives. So one-to-one stuff matters. So I'm wondering if you'd like to break out into some small groups, Duncan, or Annika, and look at this question. What do you think are the characteristics of a healing community? What does a healing community look like for you or feel like? Okay.
And how long do
we were thinking that listening was a really deep, reflective. Listening to each other is such an important part of pastoral care and a healing community.
Yep.
In our group, we talked about connectedness, confidentiality, listening, and being non-judgmental, available, caring. Those kind of words, very important words.
Indeed. Crucial.
Yes.
The basis of many things. Yep.
Yes.
In our group, we talked about the importance of simply a chat during this COVID time, when people are just needing sometimes to hear another voice and talk about ordinary old stuff. That can be quite a healing thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The things we took for granted.
Yes.
Yep.
The other thing that I'd like to throw in is that you build your relationships in good times, so that when the stresses come, there's some strength that can actually stand the stress.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Good thinking.
I can't tell you the number of I think, I mean, the Pastoral Partner program is 20 years old. But over before COVID, I was getting lots of requests for people to help them renovate, if I can put it that way, their pastoral care program across the country. And those people have been back in touch with me to say we did it just in the nick of time, because it was has become so important for them through this time. Yep. So you're absolutely right. Building in preparation, really. Anything else?
How, out of curiosity, how frequently do most churches have a pastoral carers meeting?
Well, I'll come to that later, but pretty soon. But to give you a quick answer, it varies, but mostly we found what's worked is about every 2 months, bi-monthly.
Yeah,
It's about right. It's about right. We don't. What we've tried to do is not make pastoral care a burden, but our meetings, our pastoral care meetings in Rosefield Church, where this all began, over 20 years they've been the best attended meetings of the congregation, even better than meetings of the congregation. Isn't that interesting? So
I've found over the years, and this goes back to Presbyterian days, once a month you have continuity.
Well, I think we'll talk about it a bit more in detail later. It depends.
Okay.
It depends on what you're trying to do at that meeting. Okay, and that will change how often you need to meet. Okay, well, I'm going to zip through some of the things that I talk about in training about a healing community. They're general things. But while I'm doing that, in case you want to zone out, I'm wondering if you'd like to think about what are the longings of your people? What are the longings of your people? Because I think it's an important question, because it informs how we are together. Okay, so this is the old song from Cheers. Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name and they're always glad you came. So this is about connection. We've talked about that connection, and right now it's about being remembered. It's about still belonging without face-to-face presence, and that means we need to remember people and how easy it is, if we're not well organised, to have people drop out and drop off our attention span, out of our attention span. So I've talked a little bit about this already, that a healing community is an intimate community where suffering and comfort are shared. Both of those things, where we share our common humanity. It's a community of grace, and it's a community that lives by grace. A whole lot of communities don't feel that way. And a whole lot of the preconceptions of people from outside of the church is that we are not communities of grace. So we have to work really hard on that, I think. A community where growth and change is encouraged, where all of us are open to being influenced by the Holy Spirit and by each other. You see how I'm talking about ethos type things? A community of interdependence. Now, if you're a Stephen Covey fan, you'll know that he talks about the maturing of human beings from dependence as children, and in all sorts of scenarios where we might be dependent, into independence, where we spread our wings and do our own things and very much our own person. But he said that is, often people think that's the end of our maturity, when we're completely independent. But he says the third stage is the most important, and that's where we learn to be interdependent. That is about relationship maturity. So how we demonstrate our interdependence in our community life is really important. The community's values are continually discussed and understood. I've included this because, and the picture reflects my experience in Tennessee, when my husband was doing an exchange with a church, a big church in Tennessee, and the older women of the congregation would meet every Friday, and together they would make quilts. Very American thing, make quilts for anybody who was being married, any brides that were being married in the church, and there were lots of them. And I loved to go, because I had the privileged status of being the minister's wife, very traditional roles in that place, I tell you, the Bible Belt. And I would listen to their conversation, and that's where I got to understand that community best, listening to the women as they discussed and understood their history, their relationships, their faith. So I've included that as a part of a healing community. The community is maintained by the practice of servanthood, really important. And the community is consistently and reliably inclusive. That's how we feel safe. You'll get the slides, so I won't go on about it. I've come back to that diagram, and I will put up at some stage the original diagram. I think it was Janet who asked for that. But this is where we're honing down on the smaller parts about how we teach skills and how we teach and learn the way to have these conversations in helpful ways. And so hence the Pastoral Partner program. When we came to Rosefield, we found that the elders back in the day, this was 1990, do you mind? Long time ago, the elders took responsibility for the pastoral care. And what we found was that the night before an elders meeting, there was a scurry of phone calls all around the congregation so the elders could feel up to date as they reported back into the elders meeting. And we thought there's something wrong with this. This is not real pastoral care. It's not an update. It's more than that. And so we worked together to restructure the way that we did pastoral care. So our goal was to build a mission team in pastoral care that works consistently with integrity to create a spirit-led healing community. That was our goal, hence all me going on about the healing community, because that's the wider perspective. And what were we aiming to do? I'll just race through these. Create an ethos and create a strong passion for pastoral care, diminish guilt, make it less of a duty, and to develop a structure that does all of these things to maintain a program. It's one thing to set it up, but how do we maintain it so that it's looked after and monitored, and it keeps on changing and adapting as life changes, and our congregation changes too. And to build a team of people. So this was not one of the problems that a lot of congregations have, is that I may offend somebody. Okay, so I'm aware that I don't know anything about the context into which I speak, but we have in our congregation some very faithful people who take responsibility for pastoral care, but they own it. And I've done some work with a couple of congregations in South Australia recently, where a retired minister, in fact, has become the one who does all the pastoral care, and that lets everybody else off the hook. And I think it's really important that we develop our resilience and we share the load and share the joy by building a team of people who work on these things. So the Pastoral Partner program is based around clusters of people cared for by Pastoral Partner. The clusters are small. So there are only 5 units. That's the goal anyway. It's hard to achieve, but only 5 units. In other words, a family might be a unit, a couple might be a unit, or an individual might be a unit. So the pastoral care, the pastoral cluster is not a huge number of people. And that means that you have to have lots of pastoral partners, and they are not all your predictable types. If I can put it that way, training is important and trust is important. I'm not going to go through all of that. What does a pastoral partner do? Does these things. Whoops, sorry. It keeps a friendly eye on members of the cluster. That's it. That's what we do. Okay. Pray for them, refer them on for specific help when needed, and have a commitment to attending training and support meetings. So it is not about counselling. It's not about being the oracle of all and the font of all wisdom. It's about actually paying attention. Pastoral partner is someone who pays attention, and who prays for people. Now, it may mean that paying attention means we do some practical things as well, but we are, in a sense, a representative of the whole of the congregation. We don't have to do it all on our own. So the differences between counsellors and pastoral partners, I don't want to enter into arguments about what counselling is right here, so I'm not going to go through those in particular, although I do have a master's in counselling, so I think I know a little bit about it. But a pastoral partner is not a counsellor. Really important for people to get that. They are not counsellors. They may have all the skills of a counsellor, and hopefully they're growing in their skills and all the time. But a pastoral partner shares life. The goal of a pastoral partner is about fellowship and community. It's not about solutions, fixing people or fixing situations. if I go back to that one, it may be about setting things in place that might provide solutions. If you get the difference, the pastoral partner is not the embodiment of any solution. It's about how we as the body of Christ might provide support for things to move in a more positive direction for people. A pastoral partner often becomes friends for a lifetime. They may not be the pastoral partner for a lifetime, but their connection might last a lifetime. Does that make sense? Okay, and the context for pastoral partnering is informal, whereas with a counsellor, it's more, come and see me for 6 weeks and let's see how we go. Sort of, there's an inbuilt contract in what it's about. In fact, it might be formalised even. The focus for a pastoral partner is spiritual growth and holistic well-being, not issue specific. Okay. So just like the counsellor, it's very much driven by the person for whom we care. The role of the pastoral partner is for mutual help and support. As much as I've come to hate this phrase, it is about we're in this together. We're about being human together, about being disciples together. So when we come to think about how do we make this thing effective, there are all these things that are part of making it work. Okay, so I'll talk about them carefully. Recruitment and selection is important at the beginning of a pastoral partner program. I don't suggest that people put out a general invitation, if you want to be a pastoral partner, come and sign up, because sometimes the wrong people sign up. What I would suggest though is that if you are having conversations with people that you believe are not the right people to be pastoral partners, have in your back pocket alternative ministry options for them. So have thought it through so that you can say, I'm not sure that you're, that this is the perfect place for you, but what about trying this? For instance, I have a family member who's in our congregation at the moment who is a pastoral partner, but her role is to write notes and letters because she always visits at the wrong time and she stays too long. And so she can let loose, we might have more problems. Do you know what I'm trying to be tactful, but she can be a nuisance. So my guideline is avoid people who've got too much on their own plate at the moment. Avoid people who are nosy. Avoid people who are too preoccupied with judgment to listen. Too preoccupied with judgment to listen. Look, have a range of other things that they can do as part of the pastoral effort of your congregation, like cook meals to put in the freezer, or be on the ready to cook a meal roster, or all sorts of things that you might discover are important to you. When setting up a program, I think the hardest choice is to know how to put clusters together. Now, in a pastoral partner program, the cluster, the group never meets as a cluster, as a group, and the groups are not published widely. So with one notable exception, back years ago, before home theatres were popular, one of our pastoral partner couples had a home theatre. And so they would bring all their cluster together to watch a film or something like that. And everyone loved it. But that's not the intention. It's not to actually have a small group. It's not a small group. So you might have very disparate people in a cluster. And in putting people into a cluster, you have to think about workload. So if you have a number of people with mental illness in your congregation, don't put them all with the same pastoral partner. You wear your pastoral partner out. And I always had a mixture of people who are easy to care for with perhaps one who's not so easy to care for in a cluster. So that there's a balance. That's to help with the mutuality of all of this. My recommendation was that every year the groups should be evaluate. You know, we should look at moving people around, and every 3 years there should be a complete resort. But I got so much opposition from pastoral partners who didn't want to lose their people, and didn't want to have to perhaps do the work of establishing new relationships. And so that's one of the barriers in this model, I think. However, I have to say that it's been consistently enjoyed. So the other thing to think about is, how do we hold together as pastoral partners? A lot of pastoral work is done in isolation, and because of confidentiality, nobody knows what's going on, but we do need to support each other. And we do need to communicate. So what the program does is it offers not just the initial training, basic training, but it also offers training in small doses, so that there's something that that keeps us sharp every couple of months. So there's some input. So what we used to do, and this isn't, you know, obviously modifiable, but we used to meet at 7:30 sharp. We would have 50 minutes of input, whether from the program, from the written resources, or we'd have a visiting speaker for 50 minutes. Whole congregation would be invited. And then we would have 20 minutes of supper from 8:20 to 8:40. And then the rest of the congregation would go, and there'd be a closed meeting for pastoral partners. And what we did was we divided into small groups, and they're always the same group, so that we're maintaining confidentiality with the same small 2 or 3 people. And whilst not mentioning names, but in a small congregation, that doesn't help a lot, we would share about where we were at with our pastoral caring. And inevitably in that conversation would come up issues of concern. And then we would pray together and for each other. And then at about 9:10, we would come together as a whole group, and we would have a conversation about general themes, whether it was our own exhaustion, or whether it was issues of a number of, well, for instance, in our congregation, we had a serious assault of an elderly person in their home just down the road from the church building. And so we knew that we were dealing with a whole lot of anxiety amongst our oldest congregants. And so in that conversation, we have issues of, what do we do about this? Okay, what can we do as a congregation, as a community, to deal with this particular issue? We might have concerns about domestic violence. We might have issues of grief or something like that, but something in common that we would then pass back to our leadership team to work through what else we could do. So there was a gathering together, and then we would pray for each other, and be gone by 9:30. It took a fair bit of discipline, still does take a fair bit of discipline to keep to the 2 hours, but we thought that that was really important, so that people knew what they were signing up for, and they'd want to come because they know they'd get home at a certain time. All those things work. That we would encourage leadership from within the group. So some of those sessions, the 50-minute sessions, would be taken by pastoral partners. and that a part of having a good program is celebrating and recognising pastoral partners. Now, usually pastoral care is very quietly done in the background in a congregation. I wouldn't argue with that. But I think at some time people need to understand what the congregation needs to understand what the pastoral partner program is and who their pastoral partner is. And there needs to be commissioning and thank yous and those sorts of things. To ignore that is to devalue the ministry, in my view. Okay. I'm just watching the time. The last thing about, well, the nearly last thing, is that what we do as pastoral partners is only a part of the whole, or in particular, a part of the whole. That pastoral ministry is not about all of ministry, that it needs to be integrated into what else our congregation is doing. So it may be that it's important for the worship people to consider lament. What does it mean for lament to have a place in our worship? And that might have it might come from our pastoral experience. It might lead into more pastoral experience. So the pastoral care needs to be integrated into the life of the congregation, not something separate. What we did and what we do now at my current congregation is that we gather with the minister, the leadership of the Pastoral Partner program, because it takes quite a bit of coordinating. The leadership of the Pastoral Partner program meets with the minister. In the past, it's been with the youth worker as well, so that there's a flow through of information and awareness in that sort of way. Okay, I'm talking a lot, I'm sorry. I do want to talk quickly about training, because we let this slip an awful lot. But what training does all of these things. And I've had people who say to me, look, Sharonne, I've been doing pastoral care in my congregation for 50 years. Surely I don't need to be trained. And I would say to them, then we need your experience in the training room. And we need you to help us all. But I'd have to say my motivation is really that we need to all be on the same page, and our model and understanding needs to change and adapt with our congregation. And so being together helps us do that. And I'd have to say, people love to learn, and there's so much to learn. There's so much to learn about all sorts of topics, and you'll find them all in the resources. Family violence, issues about mental health, issues about how families work, issues like dementia, all sorts of things. There's so much to learn, and there are so many experts both within our congregation and in our region and in our community who love to talk about their work and share their wisdom. So I think training is one of the most important things that we do. We get smarter, we get wiser, and we increase our understanding. So the things that I think are really crucial in a training program are these: listening skills, over and over and over again. I need to re-hone my listening skills at least every 2 years. And so we need to get more comfortable about practicing together and laughing together about our mistakes, and getting our discipline, our self-discipline in order. Okay. I think that we as pastoral care people, need to hone our language for talking about spirituality in the 21st century. I think that there are many ways that we can talk about spiritual things with people who are very shy about talking about God. And that includes people in our congregations. So we need to learn the language of starting with our humanity and starting with our human spirituality. And I'll talk more about that when I'm back with the book Solstice, because that's what the book was about. How do we talk about spirituality in ways that people who know nothing about God can understand? I think loss and grief is something that we need to keep good at and thinking about. I think that boundaries and ethics have a place in a revision. We need to keep on looking at it, keep on doing it every couple of years, and topics that are relevant and timely for your own context. Okay, so you may want to invite somebody on Zoom to your little group of pastoral carers to talk about trauma, or to talk about recovery from bushfires, or recovery from whatever. Okay, so how do we look after pastoral partners? You'll get these slides, so I'm not going to go into it all completely, but it is this idea that the pastoral partner matters as much as the people in their cluster, and that what they do matters. And so one of the important things in our, in that training, in that meeting outline that I gave you, was that a small group of people meets with you every couple of months, and they will pick up if you're burnt out. What we hope is that they will, and that they will have the courage to say, you need to step back from this for a little bit. Or what if you stepped back? How would that look? How would that feel? So that we actually practice caring for each other in those small groups. We need to make it okay to give it up for a while. That it's not a failure. It's not. It doesn't mean that we're too fragile. It means we're human, and that there's capacity in this congregation for us to move in, and when we need to move out, to care for ourselves. My concern is that a lot of pastoral carers around our churches are very burnt out, and we need to watch that in this current situation as well, because our pastoral care has to be intentional right now. It doesn't work casually like it used to, when you'd say hello and pass the peace on Sunday morning. Okay. And we need to celebrate. We need to affirm each other when good pastoral care is happening. So going back to the goal, what it looks like in your place may look differently to what it does in mine, but our goal might be the same: to build a mission team in pastoral care that works consistently and with integrity to create a healing community. So it's breakout group time, and we'll just have a short time. What are the particular pastoral challenges for you in normal time? And what are the gaps in your pastoral strategies? And then we're going to talk about COVID for a few minutes. Okay? I'm sure that we could spend a lot of time debriefing COVID challenges, and I suspect you've done some of that already. So I'm just going to run through some that I've come across, because a part of that is that there's a fine line between giving ourselves opportunity to vent and to talk about all of this, and a fine line between that and re-traumatizing each other all the time by continually talking about it. So I'm just going to set a context for our conversation in a minute by just going through some of these. If that's okay, if you want to add your wisdom, please put it on chat, okay? And remind me, somebody, before I go, that there's an important question on the chat line that I need to address. Okay, so the COVID challenges. Firstly, uncertainty and isolation going together is a really tough issue for people's mental health. And if you go down to the bottom of the list, there's the long-term stalling of plans, and the ineffectiveness of planning, really. And, you know, the obvious things are big things like weddings and funerals and things like that. But there are lots of things in all of our everyday lives that we can't plan for. And that's a challenge for us. There's a lot of loss and grief, and a whole lot of it's disenfranchised. In other words, we don't give ourselves permission to talk about it. So I'm not as badly off as somebody else, I sound so self-absorbed when I talk about this aspect of what COVID is meaning for me, or what lockdown is meaning for me. And so a whole lot of it is pushed under the mat, and I think some of that will come out in the months to come. We've got attention fatigue. We have to make so many decisions and think about the implications of where we go to shop and what we're doing, and whether we, you know, how we manage something so we're home by 8 o'clock at night, you know, all that. So attention fatigue and compassion fatigue. There's a change of focus when we're spending more time on our own or just with our family, and that has some really positive things and some really negative things about it. Challenging for our well-being and the well-being of those around us, actually. It's a time of revaluing and sometimes devaluing parts of our life that have been really important before. And that is challenging when we're doing that on our own or with those who are closest to us. There are surprises around resilience. We found some interesting things, that some of our leadership in our congregation found the inability to worship in the building more difficult than others. So people who are usually resilient, you know, leadership types have found lockdown really hard, and are resentful about church leadership making difficult decisions. We need to stay alert to trauma and mental health issues in those that we care for, can converse with, and that means a level of attention that's stressful. We have cumulative effects in communities of bushfires and storms and all sorts of things going on. And it doesn't go away, it adds on. It's an add-on. The other thing that I found difficult has been the redefinition of vulnerability for older church members. People who are over 70, who consider themselves healthy, able, leadership types, do everything, be everything, go everywhere, are now defined as vulnerable. And that has been really hard for people. And as I said, the long-term stalling of plans. So my questions for you are these. And so we'll spend a few minutes in our groups. I'm not sure you can see my screen when you go into a group. So if you'd like to look at those and choose which ones of those are important to you as an individual, and then see how your conversation goes. What are the particular pastoral challenges for your community right now? What will be the pastoral challenges when it's time to debrief as a community? I think a lot of us are trying to, whilst we're venting, but I think we're trying to plan out of our venting. It's too soon. Debriefing needs to come later. How will you manage the pastoral load? And how will you care for yourself? So one of those questions at least will spark something in you that you want to share in your group. So over to you, Duncan.
Okay, we're back.
Hello, everybody. Okay, I'm very happy for you to send me some messages on the chat line, but because we're running short of time, we're not going to feed those issues back. But I'm very happy for you to email me if there's anything of concern that's come out of that conversation. It's a beginning point, it's an awareness raising point, and I'm hoping that the conversations will continue as you think about the implications of what we've talked about this morning. I promised this slide, and so here it is, it's up again. But also we had a question about, now I wrote it down somewhere, it was about how do we deal with somebody who comes into a congregation with bad intent? An intruder was the question. And as I just said to Duncan, I think this is a matter for a whole session really. But what we have as leaders, we have responsibilities to the individual and to the whole. And so some of the most difficult conversations I've had, but the most important conversations I've had, is where I take somebody aside and share with them the dilemma of having to keep a community safe, or individuals within a community safe, and our responsibility to them. And so what that might mean about putting some boundaries around someone's attendance or their behaviour in that context. And so it's a difficult conversation, and it may need presbytery support for you to do that. But your first priority is to keep your congregation safe. And if there are, especially if there are things like intervention orders and those sorts of things around a situation, it becomes even more important that you deal with it quickly and effectively. Make sure you get your facts straight before you make assumptions about what's dangerous and what's intentional and all of that sort of stuff, and have a listening approach. But you need to be firm about what needs to happen for the sake of to keep people safe. So I'm sure your presbytery has ways to help you do that. Certainly we have all sorts of resources to help with that sort of situation. I don't think we even have time to talk about it more than that. But obviously it's tricky. How we enter into contracts with people, how we exclude people, under what circumstances, how we communicate with the congregation about the exclusion of someone is really tricky, and we need the wisdom of others to help us with it. Okay, well, I've come to the end of my time with you. Thank you so much for the invitation to join you. And clearly that every congregation is different, and every congregation has different needs. And so if there are ways that I can support you and your congregation, if you want someone to Zoom in and do some education, I'm quite happy to be involved in that. If you need to talk some more, I'm very happy for you to communicate with me first through email. So my prayer is that you will be inspired and know that you're supported and cared for as you undertake this enormous challenge of caring for our communities, when communities are disconnected and people are uncertain. So God bless you all in all that you do. And I pray that you'll remember that being grounded in hope does not disappoint us. Here is my email address if that is helpful to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sharon. That was very insightful and complex and rich, and doing justice to a lot of things in just an hour and a half about pastoral care is just, yeah, wonderful. And you've left me longing for more. And I think from what I've heard in my groups, I'm not the only one. So that's great. I hope there's a lot more to talk about, and I hope that those conversations will continue in congregations, in the presbytery, wherever we go. And thank you so much for making yourself available for us to email to, and even your offer to do some coaching with our congregations. That is just marvelous, and we're very, very grateful.
You're welcome.
We'll see you again on the 18th of September, and I'll be looking forward to that. That will be the same link for everybody that linked in today to this Zoom meeting, but there will be information sent around as well, of course. So just wait for that to appear on the Facebook and the emails and everywhere else. We'll email the PowerPoint slides around, and we'll let everybody know when the session is on our YouTube channel where you can watch it. So I think that's it, and we packed a lot of stuff in the last hour and a half. So go make yourselves a cup of coffee or tea or whatever it is that you like to drink, or perhaps a bit of a biscuit or something to fortify yourself, and do some self-care, and just give it some time to sink in. And yeah, there will be plenty of time to go back to it as well. And my blessings also to all of you caring for your people, working in your congregations, working with what you've got at the moment and making the best of it. It's just wonderful what happens. Thank you.